One thing that I've been noticing, and this is the general criticism that I tend to see, and this is coming from people on all sides of the spectrum, from actual Sanders supporters to people who've even worked with the campaign, people who were actively, canvassing for him and the like, and of course there are people on the other side of the aisle, like with libertarians and such, also having the same feeling. I even saw Ron Paul recently had an article that he released on his website or whatever, through Facebook or is where I saw it, basically talking about, hey, like him or dislike him, one thing you could always say about Bernie Sanders is he's authentic and he wears what he believes on his sleeve, and of course, as of now, it doesn't appear he's that way anymore. Let's first dispel with the notion that all of a sudden Bernie Sanders is this, as libertarians like to use lately, cuck to the establishment. Also, let's dispel with the notion as well that he is somehow, I guess in a way, impervious to making decisions that don't 100% align with your views. Here's the thing. He has always been very diplomatic in his approach to politics. He's very astutely fought by, frankly, the same values for the past 4 decades, but he's attained small wins toward those goals over those decades. For example, he voted for Obamacare, even though he was actually an active proponent against Obamacare, given that it was basically the Republican plan repackaged under the new conservative wing of the Democratic Party. When you factor in that the Heritage Foundation recommended Obamacare initially as a way of kind of keeping the private marketplace involved in health insurance outcomes and decision making so that there could still be a market play at work, was the argument, I guess. Obama positioned himself to be in support of that plan, and that's ultimately what Obamacare is. I mean, even Hillary Clinton has made this point about how Obamacare, before it was called Obamacare, was Romneycare, and, that the comparison is apt. Bernie Sanders was not in favor of that. However, he did see, with the provisions that were outlined in the legislation, how it moved closer to a universal health care system that is covered with a Medicare for All proposal, which is what he's advocated for decades. He's not like Ron Paul in the sense that Ron Paul, if he even has an inkling of a disagreement with a certain piece of legislation, votes against it. Now, for better or for worse, you could argue that when it came to big issues, like, for example, auditing the Federal Reserve, Ron Paul was pretty ineffective in getting that done, even though that was a primary focal point of his entire congressional career from the beginning to the end. He was even a part of the main platform of his last presidential bid. It was one of the reasons why I supported him in 2012. The only reason why a partial audit was passed was because of the way Bernie Sanders handles diplomacy with his colleagues in the Congress. And I make that point because Ron Paul likes to characterize the situation as Bernie Sanders nerfing, or neutering, I should say, the legislation itself, when really it kind of comes down to pull a Ron Paul move and stick with a piece of legislation that, frankly, should be the ideal version of the legislation, which is a full audit of what's going on and all transactions involved with the Fed, or not have anything happen at all. And so it's kind of in one of those moments in American politics where there's a lot of money at play in this particular situation, and something is better than no thing. And frankly, that partial audit, which without Sanders would not have passed, is the reason why we figured out that the Federal Reserve was giving billions of dollars in illegal loans to foreign governments and foreign banks. This is not something that, frankly, should be taken lightly when you're trying to say, oh, well, because he's endorsing Hillary Clinton, that he is now somehow inauthentic. Now, I'm personally frustrated with him endorsing Hillary Clinton, but not necessarily because he's endorsing Hillary Clinton. It's more because of the way and rather the context of how that's even going on. And this goes for anything. This goes from the accusations of electoral fraud throughout the entire election process during the primary season on the Democratic side. People talk about exit polls and whether or not they're valid or not, but frankly, there's not enough evidence to, astutely say, hey, this is definitely fraud, but signs do point to that based off of the exit poll results. But even ignoring that, even if it ends up being just, a total wash and just misplaced data, you look at how over 150,000 people were purged from the voting rolls in Brooklyn, how overall the registering process when it comes to being a Democrat in a lot of these close primary states and caucuses was very convoluted, and, you know, given that the majority of the electorate is independent, and given that our system is set up on a binary paradigm of Dem versus Republican, it's unfair to basically write off, oh, well, you should have registered in time as a reason, given that most people don't identify as Democrat or Republican, most people identify as independent. And so, because it was difficult for people to be registered on time, whether they didn't know the information or whether they were told misinformation is irrelevant, it led to, you know, a snowball effect that over the course of the entire election has put a bad taste in my mouth about not only the election process in the United States, but also the Democratic Party as a whole, which everyone knows the Democratic Party is corrupt, but goddamn if they didn't show their true colors during this primary season. When we're talking about just the context of, like, how Bernie Sanders is even in this position in the first place, you know, and, you know, one thing I didn't mention is AP announcing that Hillary was the nominee before the final day of elections, which arguably could have sealed the deal on, you know, people not showing up, to calling California the winner, even though a great many of the votes weren't counted yet. So there's already been a number of counties that have flipped since they've, you know, kept counting and counting. Hillary's probably still going to win the state, but I mean, it's just something to consider. With all of that in mind, Bernie is now in a position to where he has 1,900 plus delegates going into the convention. The DNC has certain platform rules on who gets to speak at the convention and what delegates get to vote. If he didn't endorse Hillary Clinton, then he would have been in a position to where, one, he loses all of his delegates, but frankly, more importantly, he loses that platform to be able to make his ideas articulated to the people of the DNC and the nation at large, of course, because it's going to be televised nationally. He's a guy that has always played the long game. So even if it's not because of the DNC's party rules and him, you know, trying to still make sure that the convention's contested or not is irrelevant, he's in a position to where he's basically been a part of the two-party binary for a long time, understands how integral it is to make sure the wrong candidate isn't elected. He campaigned very heavily against Reagan, very heavily against Herbert Walker Bush and W. Bush, and even Bill Clinton, to you know, a much lesser degree. Obviously, there's a lot of social policies that him and Clinton agreed on, generally speaking. My point about bringing that up is, you know, we kind of have a quasi-fascist in the race, and I've never subscribed to the vote for lesser of two evils ideology, and I'm not going to vote for Hillary Clinton or Trump, but I can understand where he's coming from, because if you look at his record, he's a pragmatic politician, and his pragmatism is going to get in the way of him being a bit of an egotist and running third party, which is frankly what a lot of his supporters, including myself, would appreciate him doing. Let's just get rid of this notion that he's somehow inauthentic because of this endorsement. He still has a 40-plus, 50-plus year record of civil rights activism. He is proven himself to be a grassroots leader, even if he doesn't like to be identified as such. And more importantly, he is mobilizing his base not to support Hillary Clinton. And this is something that's kind of my big takeaway from this whole situation. This is about supporting policy positions and progressive ideals. Now, you know, I'm not one for 100% identifying with labels. There are certain political terms I subscribe to when it comes to self-identifying, but progressive policies economically are frankly well substantiated scientifically when you're looking at their sociological effects, their anthropological effects, and of course their economic effects, even though economics is not a science. Him bringing these platform positions to the DNC floor, and frankly shoving it down the throat and up the ass of Hillary Clinton and all of her acolytes, is a good thing. You know, there was a good article, well, not an article, it's a WordPress blog, but it basically made a very emotive point about how no matter what happens going into 2020, 2018, 2020, Hillary Clinton is being held to a high standard. The country loathes her. Democrats don't trust her. Even the Democrats that like her don't trust her. Republicans fucking hate her, and independents hate her. So she's in a position already to where, frankly, she's vulnerable going up against the quasi-fascist. Which, that has me worried, sure. But that's not, you know, that's not necessarily Trump's fault. That's Hillary Clinton's fault for being so wishy-washy over the years and having very dubious connections to financial institutions and other institutions like Big Pharma and Big Coal. So there's these things that make a lot of people apprehensive about supporting her, and it's not a matter of Bernie Sanders is endorsing her to basically emphasize her being elected, it's more to emphasize Trump not being elected. And I think that's an important distinction, because even though he is endorsing Hillary Clinton, he still has plans to mobilize a 50-state coalition of progressives to run for local, federal, and state elections so that we can basically pull a Tea Party on the left hand of the spectrum and take over the American government one piece at a time from the bottom up, to engage the actual working class of this country and the poor of this country to, frankly, mobilize yourselves and fucking vote, and to act civically. He has made this point time and time again that even if he were elected, this is not going to be something that ends on election day or inauguration day. This is something that never ends. Justice and the need to fight for it is an ongoing marathon. While I disagree with him endorsing Hillary Clinton, under the circumstances, it's a reasonable position to be in. He's not egotistical, otherwise he would, make a big fucking deal about having to endorse her, and, the media especially loves conflict. He would have easily gotten some eye candy from the media if he had made a stink about having to endorse her and, voiding his 1,900 delegates and stuff like that. But at the same time, that short-term win would come at a long-term cost. And that is basically damaging the brand of progressivism on the left that has come up in the last year. So it's a real shame that we're in this situation that we are in now, because frankly, if it were an even playing field, I wouldn't be having this conversation with a lens. But it wasn't an even playing field. The deck was stacked against him from the beginning. The fact that he pulled 46% of the vote with literally every aspect of the mainstream and establishment machine going against him is fucking impressive. The dude never even had a fucking super PAC. And the super PAC that started from the nurses union to support him, he asked them to stop doing that. This has been a very, very eye-opening election for a lot of people, and we should not ignore the progress that has been made in making people aware of how broken the political system is. And I feel that Sanders, in a bid for, a small amount of attention for a brief period of time, cashing in on creating conflict to not endorse Hillary Clinton, would have ultimately damaged that. It wouldn't have damaged it permanently, but it would have removed, in a sense, the validity of an important voice in this fight. Because guess what? He's still a fucking senator. And he's still going to be running for election in 2018. And I guarantee you, he's still going to be just as stoic, just as astute, if not more so, now that he has national recognition. He's not some crazy 74-year-old Jew from Vermont anymore. He's quite literally the match that set the fuse. I'm the Axel Snacks. If you have nice things to say, say them. If you have mean things to say, please say them. Like if you like, dislike if you don't, and subscribe if you wish. Have a good day.